Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's good to be back here with you all. Alhamdulillah. We're going to get started right away, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble companions and followers, his noble family companions and followers. We intend to learn and to teach, to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, and to encourage holding fast to the book of God and the way of his messenger, and to call unto guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure and his proximity and his reward. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. So alhamdulillah, it's nice to be here. And thank you all for coming on such a warm, hot day when you're escaping a house that has AC for a room that does not have it yet. But good news, inshallah, we're supposed to get it this weekend. So truly appreciate everyone making it out. Alhamdulillah, I know in hot weather, it's not easy. So before we get started with the tafsir for today, we're going to look at what the assignment was for last week, inshallah. So welcome. And alhamdulillah, it's already been shared on the chat, which is the homework was to try to recite daily 200 times, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. And as we're doing that, to reaffirm that Allah, the meaning of these words, that Allah is sufficient for us and the best to entrust all of our affairs to. And that while we recite, to bring to surface all of our worries and thoughts that we are not content with, and things that, things that are troublesome and worrisome and meddlesome. And essentially to try to delete those thoughts and reset our thinking with this dhikr. So first I want to ask, if you don't have to raise your hands if you don't want to, but it would be nice if you did raise your hand. How many of you found this assignment beneficial or useful? Good, alhamdulillah. And if anyone has any thoughts or reflections about this particular one. It says, I found the practice to be very comforting. This is being shared through our Zoom, and also provided some relief and serenity when I couldn't figure out how to address my own affairs, to just submit them to al-wakil and hope for the best. Alhamdulillah, that's beautiful. That's exactly that's kind of what we're hoping for, is that just there's relief in that. There's alleviation.
I think it's very interesting that throughout the week, or even sometimes like in the beginning of the 200, we would start off like more emotional and more kind of like taking in, and then either throughout the week or even like in some days are more stressful than others. Like the beginning was more emotional, and then for me it would end as comfort and relief, and like kind of a lot lighter.
A lot lighter. MashaAllah. Can you relate to that as well? Any other people in this room that can relate to this? Like when you say in the beginning more emotional, do you mean like you're kind of frazzled in the beginning, you're just starting it, it's hard, it takes a little bit of time to get into it, but because of maybe distraction and things like that, and then getting into a place of more.
I think more like bringing into, everything is like intentionally bringing everything that you want to kind of do out.
Yeah.
So whatever it's stressing, whatever that's on your mind or comes on my mind, kind of bringing that in.
Yeah.
And all of it, I think that was it gets heavier.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
like that was more like heavier and Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Well, that's really, I mean, that's really beautiful, alhamdulillah. I'm glad that's you found it like ending it in a state of serenity and sakina is a really good, alhamdulillah. It's nice also, I think, when those emotions come to surface, right? That like there's a practice that can lighten it without it being, overwhelming. So inshallah, that's alhamdulillah. Any other thoughts or reflections from the assignment? Brothers are allowed to share, by the way.
I don't have much to add. It's already been said.
Mhm.
I guess there's some hurdles. It's like some trial and error. I think
Mhm,
a lot of it's just persistence.
mhm.
Sometimes changing the scenery helps a little bit.
Yes.
Going out for a walk or like that.
Mhm.
That's helped a little bit. And
Alhamdulillah.
having advice, it's just a little bit of hurdles. I think it was a bit challenging, to be honest.
Yeah,
But I think it's getting there.
yeah. MashaAllah. I mean, changing scenery is actually excellent. Like, it's very good to change scenery. For some people, especially like, so I'm not a specialist in temperament theory, but from what I know, there are certain temperaments that really benefit from like doing any of their afkar, being in sunlight, specifically sunlight, specifically somewhere where you can feel, one of your senses can feel the weather outside in some way. So if it's not sunlight, then touching the sand, like physically touching it. So there's apparently this is something that is known. Different temperaments lean this way, and it creates like a grounding experience where then the remembrance becomes more connected. So that would be just, I don't know if that might work, but in terms of going outside and changing scenery, mashallah. And here we have another Zoom reflection. Assalamu alaikum. Focusing on particular issues, worries actually brought more presence and connection into the dhikr, alhamdulillah. I thought it would distract me more to focus on a worldly concern, but it had the opposite effect of making me connect more. Inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Any other thoughts? So I'm going to be honest. When I first start the adhkar, I'm like numb. I'm totally numb. I'm like, I mean, just do it, just do it. And then as I get into it, the numbness goes away. And then the thoughts can come to the surface. But am I there when I start? No, I'm totally not there when I start. I'm in la la land. I'm just numb. I'm just like, I numb everything down. I can't feel anything because I want to, I'm going to feel safe to feel things once I'm in dhikr. Then as I'm in the dhikr, then things can rise. And as I do the adhkar, they alhamdulillah, they get released. But I actually always start disconnected and numb. But it's the words themselves that, like, in being in that state, that then I feel safe to feel, and then I can feel it all. And alhamdulillah, and for me, that's the process. And similar to what you mentioned at the end, I'm just grateful and peaceful, and glad that it was taken care of there. So alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Any other thoughts with the assignment? If anyone online did the assignment too and they wanted to share something, they can as well. We will get started then with the allegorical commentary from last week's verses, inshallah. So last week we did 11 through 13. And this week we're actually going to complete the surah, inshallah. We're going to complete the tafsir of the surah. We're still going to leave the last allegorical commentary of the surah for next week. But the tafsir will be completed today, inshallah. So as it relates to the allegorical commentary of last week's verses, I'll read the translation first, so then you can see where the allegories come in. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. No misfortune befalls save by God's leave, and whosoever believes in God, he guides his heart, and God is knower of all things. Obey God and obey the messenger. Then if you turn away, only the clear proclamation is incumbent upon our messenger. God, there is no God but he, and in God let the believers trust. So the majority of the commentary focuses on the first verse, verse 11, I should say. And Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says that there is no nafs, there's no soul, except that it has a decree and it has an apportioned amount of the good of this world and its difficulties. And so every soul has on this earth, believing soul and disbelieving soul, what is their rizq and also what is their qadr. No one is free from that. And he says there's no tribulation of the heart or the nafs, apparent or hidden, except by the permission of Allah and his decree. And just like that, there is no happiness or joyous occasion or increase except by his permission. Imam al-Qushayri mentions about this, that whoever believes in Allah, Allah guides his heart until they are guided to Allah in their good times and guided to Allah in their hard times. And in this dunya and in akhirah, they are guided to paradise. And he says he is guided. The person, when the meaning of yahdi qalbah, wa ma yu'min billah yahdi qalbah, that this clause yahdi qalbah, guides his heart, means that this person will be guided to the prophetic character. And specifically it says not just the sunnah of his, in terms of his worship, but the sunnah of his khuluq, the actual character of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Says that's one position. The other position is to follow the sunnah and avoiding bid'ah or innovation. He says, whoever believes in Allah in times of comforts and blessings and bliss, know that he, Allah, guides their hearts to gratitude. And whoever believes in Allah during rough times, difficulties, trials, know that Allah will guide their hearts to patience and contentment. As-sabr wa rida. Now, I should make a caveat here that, and this was asked, like I did a Celebrate Mercy program on Friday. And so I talked about this in very abstract general terms. And then someone asked the question, well, what about like a very common question that gets asked is about like domestic violence. And so are you saying that in rough times and hard times, the person is, their heart's guided to patience, which means they sit in a situation of domestic violence and they just like are patient over it, meaning they don't do anything? And the answer to that is no. Patience is really like, doesn't do justice to translate the word sabr. And usually even in Quranic translations, a lot of times they'll translate it as patient perseverance, right? So in English, it connotes something passive, but in Arabic, it connotes something that's much more active. And so, so in terms of definition wise, the person is undergoing a perseverance, a type of struggle to do what Allah is pleased with in a particular situation, right? So there's something difficult and there's something, Allah is not pleased with us allowing ourselves to get abused, for example. So patience in that situation is to actually remove yourself from that. And it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of sabr for a human being, a woman who's in a violent situation, to remove herself from that abuse. It takes an immense amount of patience. I mean, it's like people who are in this work will tell you that it's very hard sometimes, even though the woman is suffering and will call 911, will be hospitalized, oftentimes because of how much damage she's undergoing, and on a psychological level, for her to overcome what has occurred and to gather the strength to get out of that situation requires a tremendous amount of effort, a tremendous amount of sabr. So like that's sabr. Patience is not just letting yourself get abused. That's not what we're talking about. So I just wanted to add that caveat here. Just because I think that's a common misunderstanding. When it does come to things that we can't control, right? So when Yusuf alayhi salam is thrown into the well, he has no choice. He cannot remove himself from harm, right? So there's like literally, quite literally at rock bottom, right? And there's nowhere to go. He has to just wait for what will come to him from God. And that might be a different kind of patience than obviously when you have choice in the matter and there are things that you can actually do. So, so far as we have choice and ability and strength and capacity to change our situation, we always try to strive to change it for the better. In doing that is an act of patience. It's a different kind of patience though. And then contentment also sometimes is misunderstood. Contentment doesn't mean we're happy with bad things being bad. Like that's not, no one would say, for example, I'm content with the Holocaust, astaghfirullah, right? Like that's not, rida doesn't mean, or I'm content with all the wars in the world, or I'm content with like tyranny and oppression. Contentment means I'm content with God. Like God has decreed what he has decreed. I accept his decree. I accept that there's a wisdom in this. I'm content with him as my Lord. And I'm going to respond to the situation whatever way is going to please him. Like that's what contentment is. It doesn't mean that we like harmful things or that we like sad and tragic things. It means, no, we love our Lord. So in the middle of everything else, our contentment with God is higher, is greater in our hearts than the calamity that's in front of us. So the one who believes in Allah, he says, the one who believes in Allah finds comfort and peace with Allah. And because of that, they come to know him more in the trials. They gain, their tribulations will allow them to attain a higher level of ma'rifah than they had before. And that's a good sign. That usually, like if that happens to someone, they say the tribulation was a blessing. You went through something that made you know God more, made you connect to him more, then that, just know that God blessed you with that. That was meant for you. I mean, everything, alhamdulillah, that is khair, so it's meant for us, but that's a particular kind of like sign for us, is that this thing I went through was with absolute wisdom and absolute purpose, and through it, God brought me closer to himself, and tribulation is one of the ways that God does this.
Someone's supposed to have a thing.
Oh, yes. Okay, let's just. Yusuf alayhi salam had to show the sabr of inaction at the bottom of the well, and Hajar had to show the sabr of action by running up and down the hills to look for water. Yes, mashallah, beautiful, beautiful example. Thank you so much. He says, but people who don't believe in Allah, when they go through their trials and their tribulations, they will find nothing but suffering and pain. There's no higher transcendence. For them, it's just pain. They can't, because there's obviously not him to connect to. So Iman offers people, he says, it gives the Jannah, the paradise of Rida and Taslim, and Kufr gives the opposite of that. So faith gives the paradise or the gardens of contentment and loving surrender to God. That's what faith offers. And disbelief will offer the opposite of that, which is the heat of panicked self-management. Okay, the heat of panicked self-management. So here's a nice, I'm glad she asked that question. When Hajar alayhi salam, when she's running through and running to Safa and Marwa, would you call this, on the outside, doesn't this look like panicked self-management? Isn't that what it looks like on the outside? Mm-hmm. But what did Hajar alayhi salam say to Ibrahim alayhi salam when he left her? He said, did God command you to leave me here? And then when he said yes, then she let him go. So, I mean, this is a beautiful example of like, we practice the sabr in doing what God wants from us, right? But the heart is content with knowing that God will decree what's best for us. And that's a really, that's not an easy balance to do, like to be in exertion outwardly and in serenity inwardly. But subhanAllah, that's what her sa'i is what all of us copy, when we go and make umrah or when in the pilgrimage. So it's actually a really tremendous symbol of what faith is supposed to look like. It doesn't mean like my sabr means that I'm just waiting for like the water to come to me and the food to come to me. And that concludes the allegorical commentary from Imam Ibn Ajibah. And inshallah, we're going to go to the verses for this week. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم إنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة والله عنده أجر عظيم فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم واسمعوا وأطيعوا وأنفقوا خيرا لأنفسكم ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك هم المفلحون إن تقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا يضاعفه لكم ويغفر لكم والله شكور حليم عالم الغيب والشهادة العزيز الحكيم. O you who believe, among your spouses and your children, there is indeed an enemy unto you. So be wary of them. Yet if you pardon, forbear, and forgive, then truly God is forgiving, merciful. Your property and your children are only a trial, and God, with him, is a great reward. So reverence God as much as you are able. Listen, obey, and spend. That is better for your souls. And whosoever is shielded from the avarice of his soul, it is they who shall prosper. If you lend unto God a goodly loan, he will multiply it for you and forgive you. And God is thankful, clement, knower of the unseen and the seen, the mighty, the wise. So for the first verse, O you who believe, among your spouses and your children, there is indeed an enemy unto you. So be wary of them. Before I even get into tafsir, the idea that your spouse could be your enemy or your children could be an enemy to you, what is your reflection from this message? And it's in Arabic, it's aduan, like adu, that they're a test that can expose you to your greater enemy, which is the shaitan. Interesting. So thinking the arrogance that comes from like a wonderful spouse and kids, thinking that somehow I'm the one who did this for myself. Yeah. Mashallah. Any other thoughts? Yeah. There are times families argue and fight, and in those moments, it's as if it's as if people are, the way they behave are like enemies. I think there's an episode of Bingo. Not Bingo, what, Bluey. That's yeah.
I thought about is taking you away from that, but taking your attention away, and becoming your excuse to the attention or the time. Kind of making them, like serving the priority.
Mashallah. Yeah, I think you nailed it. Let me see what we have here. It says, shaitan or the nafs, enemy, if they become the reason one disobeys God. So alhamdulillah, I think everyone actually mentioned something that is part of this. So in what is also mentioned in the tafsir. So first, I want us to just notice something in the Arabic. It says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu inna min azwajikum. Okay, so it doesn't say inna azwajikum wa awladikum. It says among your spouses and children. All right, so there's a min, and this min is ba'd, like some wives and some kids, or some husbands and his spouse, azwaj can mean a wife or a husband. Some spouses and some children can indeed be an enemy unto you. And similar to what you mentioned about, people who might take us away from the remembrance of God. In their service, a person forgets to basically serve God instead. That is the most common, I would say, understanding of this verse. And Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says, they make you busy from obedience to Allah, and they fight with you about the affairs of this world, of the dunya. So he says, like, the spouses who pester their spouse about the life of this world, right? And so in that argumentation, there's a whole like waste of time that essentially happens because it's about something in this world, right? Take out the trash. No, I'm teasing. It's not that, but it could be anything else, like things that are things that basically are mundane, and they're mundane because as a definition, it's not mundane if it's rooted in remembrance of God. It's not mundane if it's done out of the intention for God. So it's mundane when it is purely for this world, right? So they pester their spouse about the life of this world. And then he also mentions children who do this to their parents, and they actually hold them back from their focus and their spiritual advancement. And this idea, فَاحْذَرُوهُمْ, is be cautious about their making you too busy for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you could say that this can be done, some would do this intentionally, right? And this would be unintentional. This is just the natural tendency of life, right? But for those who do so intentionally, the person has to literally overcome their immediate nuclear family to be able to practice, or to be able to remember, or to be able to be connected in their purpose in terms of the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I would say that converts often go through this struggle. Often, like I know stories of sisters who their parents she would find her hijabs in the trash can, or a brother who his parents hated that he was Muslim. So in order for him to just pray without his mom or dad, like opening the door on him, and he didn't know at the time, he would literally pray in the bathroom, because where else was he going to do that? But it doesn't have to be a convert family. Sometimes it's a Muslim family, but they're like, okay, you can be religious, but don't be that religious. Like you can be religious, but I still want you to go to parties that have alcohol and dancing, right? Like don't change that much. Like we only want you to, it's good. I like that it's doing something good for you, but don't change so much that like now you have a different like set of morals and values that you want to subscribe to than the rest of us that are doing different things. And so in that sense, the family can be sort of in opposition to the person's religious practice. Sometimes something happens, and this is a really difficult test. Oftentimes we would encourage families who are going through this to seek Islamic family counseling and therapy. Is sometimes one member of the family or one spouse starts to grow on a spiritual level, like they married, they're around the same, and then all of a sudden the wife gets more and more and more practicing, and she wants a different kind of life now, and she's changed as a person because she wants to practice, and the husband hasn't yet. He's still in the same place he was when they first got married, and he doesn't like the changes that he saw. So now it's creating friction in the marriage, right? And it's like she feels like just to do her basic practice of Islam, she has to fight her husband, right? That's a real test, and I know people go through that a lot because it's very normal for people to change at a different pace. Or it could be the opposite, where that they married at the same, and then the husband becomes very practicing, and then all of a sudden he's like, wants his wife to do things, and she's not ready for that yet because she hasn't grown to that level yet. And so, this is a very real thing in terms of the struggle of being in a different place spiritually and religiously than the other members of your family, and then feeling like they're just pulling you back and holding you back. And literally what's mentioned in Arabic is the children who actually pull their parents back. So one of the reasons I thought was interesting, Ibn Ajiba didn't say your spouse will pull you back. He says your children will pull you back, because we give to our kids in ways we're like forgiving with our kids, and like, it's okay, they're young, let them, it's okay, like, in ways that we would not do with adults. Don't do this, like between, like a husband and wife wouldn't necessarily be that easygoing, but they can basically like lose it all out of the love of a child. And this is also something that happens. So he says, be cautious about their making you too busy for Allah. Okay. But he says, but not everyone is like this. So the caution, the hadr, is to be aware of these groups generally. So, and he actually says, well, okay, so we'll pause there. Some spouses help each other remember Allah, right? That's the ideal situation, is spouses that help each other. Some children, they will, they easily sort of like can be led by their parents to remembrance and and religious practice. They're not pulling their parents away. They're okay. They're fine to do the things that they're so. And it's not everyone who's in this category, but the caution is out there. Like, know that even if you're generally in a good situation, there are times when our love of our spouses and our love of our kids and wanting to make them happy can actually pull us away from what we should be doing. And there's a context to this I'm going to get into in just a second. Even though, now just the meaning of the verse is, even if they're like this, okay? Even if they're pulling you away, it's unintentional in the sense that they can't help themselves. They're not evil. They're not like, they're not actually shaitan. They can't, this is where they're at. And so they're trying to pull you to where they're at, and it's not where you want to be at. He says, if you overlook their sins that are overlookable, which means they have to do with something in this world, sins of like in the dunya, or even if it's a sin that's related to their religion, but they do tawbah. So if you overlook, and the best way I could translate this was, and if you got into it with them, like you had a back and forth with them, and they fought you, but you don't reprimand them, and instead you forgive them, and you cover over their sins, meaning you have a magnanimity that sort of veils them from the depth of their mistake. Does that make sense? Then truly Allah is the most forgiving and most merciful, and He will be generous to you in forgiveness, just as you were with them. So on one hand, there's just a caution, word of caution in your spouses, in some of your spouses, and some of your kids, or in some of the time with your spouses and some of the time with your kids, they may behave in a way that is like an enemy to you when it comes to your religion, right? And even if that's the case, so just recognize that, be cautious, be aware. Why is that important? Because a lot of times when this happens, the person who is wanting to do something differently feels guilty, like they're doing something wrong, right? Because they didn't make their spouse or kids happy. An example, someone goes to pray, whatever it is, dhuhr or isha, and someone else says, why do you take so long to pray? You shouldn't be taking that long to pray. And the person's like, oh, I'm being so inconsiderate. I need to like pray like 2 minutes. No, like, you see what I'm saying? Like the person starts to either feel guilty about their practice, or the opposite of that, which is like, you must be shaitan. If you don't want me to pray, you must be shaitan. Only shaitan doesn't want me to pray, right? Or the opposite, like that person has now become villainized. So what is the verse actually saying? It's saying, be aware, be cautious, this happens, this exists. And then be pardoning, be forbearing, be clement. And if you're like that, Allah will be like that towards you. That attitude of, I recognize this for what it is, and on top of me recognizing it, I will which means I'm not going to feel guilty about my practice. I will practice, and I'm going to be forgiving and magnanimous and kind and forgiving. That's what the verse is really meant to do. To recognize it, though, is really important, because if you don't recognize it, they will actually pull you away without you realizing you've been pulled away. Yeah.
So if you're like trying to play with the people and we can't, question is, do you prioritize praying Jonah or praying on time? Like right when it's as close as possible.
So in the Hanafi madhab, well, yeah, different madhabs might be different on this, but in the Hanafi madhab, if you're a woman, there's no extra reward in praying in congregation or praying alone. Meaning, if the prayer that everyone else gets in congregation, you get that even if you pray by yourself. So there's no extra like incentive to pray in a group in the Hanafi school. Other schools, there's incentive. So so I am not, like, based on my own practice and like in terms of, that's the method that I learned. If the group is praying together, then I'll pray in the group. If the group is, and they're praying in a timely way, but if they're going to wait until the last second to pray, then I'd rather pray by myself and just have it in at a good time. But that's one method's approach. I don't know all the other ones. I don't know if that helps or not. Yeah.
Can I ask you about this? Or is that one that you can just went over?
Yes.
So like Barakallahu Feek with your explanation, I just need some help understanding it. I thought what it was intending, because like say that, for example, the message is your spouse or your children might pull you away.
Yeah.
And then what I would think would be the response to that would be, but hold on to your deen, for
Yes.
example. But
Yes.
in this case, what I thought was what the challenge is maybe like your spouses or your children are almost like they're challenging you in your character. So like
Yeah.
you're becoming worse or like a demon.
Uh-huh.
So it's better for you to forgive them.
Uh-huh.
That will help your character, for example. Like I thought that's the context of
Mhm.
why it's saying like the first part and then the second part.
So you are right. And so what the first part of it has to be connected to the second part of it. So let me just give you more about, because the tafsir is not done yet for this verse, but you're touching on an important aspect, which is there's an actual situation that happened in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where there's a group from Mecca that wanted to make hijrah, but it was their women and children who said that if you go with everybody else who's making the hijrah, like basically you're going to lose us, meaning we're going to lose things, or you're going to end up leaving us behind, and we're going to have to come later. So essentially the wives and the kids said, let that group go, and then we will make our own group. Like let them go ahead, and then whenever we're ready, then we'll come later. And so they did that. So they listened to their wives and their kids, and they went later. When they got to Medina, they saw that the people who had gone out before them had become learned and trained in the religion. Like the time that they had there, I don't know what the amount of time that had passed, but in the time that the first group had preceded them, they had attained spiritually and religiously a lot of wonderful things. And the other group felt like spiritual FOMO. Like we missed out hard, like we missed out big because we listened to our wives and our kids. They told us to stay behind, and we didn't want to make them upset, so we stayed behind. But look at these people, they got here earlier, they got to be with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and literally said tafaqahu fi din, like they attained an understanding of the religion, they got religious training, and it says the signs of spiritual advancement was so clear to them and the people who had come before them. And we know like the hijrah was a big deal, and the people who made the hijrah at the time they made it was a really big deal. So he says, so they actually wanted to go punish their wives and children because they were so upset with like, you guys are the ones who made us miss out on this. And so these verses were sent to encourage them to forgive and overlook, right? So what I think is interesting is that it validates what they felt. They did hold you back. They did not give you the best advice in that situation. And even so, it's better. It's better for you. It's better all around to just forgive them and overlook what happened. Yeah. So this idea of be on guard, but also don't punish, right? Your family will be in a different place. Different individuals will be in different places. We don't take a punishing or reprimanding attitude towards people who are in different places and like who can't help themselves, but that's just where they are. So they will pull people to where they are. I think it's actually a very balanced message. Be cautious and be on guard and know this is there. And at the same time, have this forbearing and patient and forgiving approach with people who are like that in your family. I actually think that's a really balanced thing. It's not like be patient and forgiving and it's okay, just make them happy and leave your religion, all your hopes for your personal religious growth behind. No, your hopes are also important and you're allowed to guard them. Your property and your children are only a trial, and God with him is a great reward. Now here, does anyone notice something different between the first verse and the second verse? So the first one says, among your spouses and your children, there is indeed an enemy. Then the second one says, your property and your children are only a trial. Yes.
The first one, my son, this one is all.
Yes, exactly. So, how can all of your children and all of your property be a trial? A distraction? Did you say distraction? Yes. Well, I mean, it can be definitely. So the word fitna literally means test, right? It's a trial, but it's also a test in the sense that it's not, can a person win during times of fitna? Or can a person succeed in a fitna? Yes. So there's a difference in even the language. The word fitna is not the same as the word adu, right? Adu is very much like combative, fighting you. Fitna is like, this is a chance where you can either succeed or you can fail, right? You can either meet the test and surpass or pass that particular test, or you meet that test and it takes you down. So property and possessions are a trial insofar as one becomes overly attached to them, even a slave to them rather than to God. There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ where he said, wretched is the slave of the dinars, wretched is the slave of the dirhams, wretched is the slave of fine dress, wretched is the slave of fine cloth. So wealth, I think it's interesting because he mentions wealth and then he mentions clothing, right? Because a person's like, okay, I don't care about money, but I care about dressing nice. What's interesting is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known to actually always dress well. Like he dressed well. In the words of Ustad Ubaidullah Evans, he loves to say this. He's like, the Prophet Muhammad was an elegant man. He always dressed well, right? And with intention. But there's a difference between dressing well, which Muslims are supposed to do, and becoming a slave of fine dress and a slave of fine cloth. And one of the evidences of like basically a sense of slavery versus other than that is waste, becoming wasteful and in that thing. So may Allah protect us all from this particular thing as women. I'm like, how many hijabs do I own right now? Yeah, I have quite a few. Alhamdulillah, I don't think I worship hijabs, but I think having too much is kind of like a sign that you're getting into a gray area that you want to come away from. Imam Ibn Ajiba also comments on this, and he says, the trial is that they can push you to sin and punishment, or, and this is what he's is emphasizing as the meaning that he leans towards, is that this is a test to see the place of the servant. Will they be guided in their test so that they do good with what they are tested with or not? Will they be strong in their faith, or will they be seen as from the weak? And Al-Hasan, he said, Al-Hasan al-Basri, he said that the word min here is some was used for the wives and kids in the earlier verse when it came to enmity, because there are many wives and children who are not enemies to their spouses and are in worship and encourage worship and encourage remembrance. He says, but for fitna, there is no min, because the good and the bad of our wealth and the good and the bad of our children are a test, and to see how we respond. He says the heart still is busy with even good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's saying that, like, you have a beautiful children and they worship, right? And the heart can be distracted from Allah by their beauty. That's normal. This is a normal thing. To come back and to be grateful and to then not be distracted from worship is part of the struggle of this life. But he said that even the good things, right? The wealth is good. Maybe you use that wealth to do good things, but can you still be distracted? Then he gives an example. And the example he gives, and I was shocked that Imam Ibn Ajib did this, because I was like, but it brings it closer to home, and it shows us that this is just the human condition. Okay, so the fact that there's a test in us in wealth, there's a test in us in our families that everyone has, and no one's ever gonna get this 100% perfect, because it is the human condition. But to be aware of it is what we're being informed of, and to kind of like, when we catch ourselves sort of lost in this way, awareness of this brings us back. He gives the example actually of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ giving the khutbah on Jum'ah, and he sees his grandchildren Hassan radiallahu anhu and Hussein radiallahu anhu, and they're wearing these long red shirts. And as they're coming into the masjid, they're tripping and they're walking and tripping and falling over their shirts. He literally leaves the minbar. He goes down and he holds them. And then he actually recites this verse, إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. He reads this verse, and he reads the whole verse, وَاللَّهُ عِنْدَهُ أَجْرٌ عَظِيمٌ. And then he says, I saw these two, and I couldn't be patient. Like I had, you've seen a child that's so cute, you have to leave what you're doing, like you're in mid-conversation and you're just like, you have to go and snuggle that kid or kiss them or hug them or whatever it is. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in the middle of a Jumu'ah khutbah, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he sees his grandkids coming in and they're just so cute, and he leaves the khutbah, he goes and holds them, and then he realizes what he's done and he tells everybody, and then he goes back and he continues the khutbah. So I thought, when I read that, then I was like, okay, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah for all of us. We're going to be distracted sometimes. It's okay. And then we're supposed to bring ourselves back, inshallah. So reverence God as much as you are able. Listen, obey, and spend. That is better for your souls. And whosoever is shielded from the avarice of his soul, it is they who shall prosper. Reverence God as much you are able was this aspect, كما استطعتم. Is that what it says? No, ما استطعتم. So some mufassirin, they said that this verse was abrogated by another verse in the Quran, which is reverence God as he should be reverenced in Surah Ali Imran. اتقوا الله حق تقاته, right? So they said that verse abrogates this one. Imam Ibn Ajib mentions that this is not an abrogation. Rather, you combine both meanings. And oh, I skipped an entire section. I'm going to go back to it. I'll finish this and I'll go back to it. Ibn Atiyah, he said that there is khilaf on whether or not this verse was abrogated or if it's clarifying. So this verse clarifies, the two verses together clarify each other, they're complementary. And that the meaning then together is اتقوا الله حق تقاته فيما استطعتم. So to have taqwa of Allah, have consciousness of Allah as he deserves, in as much as you are able. So bringing the two meanings together. If you were to say حق تقاته, could any of us ever reverence Allah as he deserves? No, that's impossible. So it actually, the idea of it being complementary just makes practical human sense, in the sense that there's no way we could actually have the reverence for him as he's worthy. He's worthy of much more than whatever we could do. So putting the two meanings together, as much as we are able. And he says what this means is that we expend our efforts and our capacity in his taqwa. Like we don't spare the effort. We expend as much as we can. And I think this is important in our times. I really, really, really feel that this is such an important message in terms of like expend yourself in the consciousness of God or in the remembrance of God. In Surah Al-Kahf, there's a verse that says, the translation of which is basically, don't let your eyes look over the people who are constantly turning to God, right? And it's the context too is that there is the life of this world pulls us. And the joys of this world pull us, and the distractions and how busy we are just to pay our bills can pull us. And it's very easy to just kind of forget about the fact that we're going to die and be resurrected, and there's going to be the hour, and we're all going to stand in front of Allah. And all of that kind of moves to the very back of our minds, and the back of as we're just trying to get through the errands in the day, right? That's a very like normal, especially in our time, like a normal way that you could say most people live, and you'd say most even Muslims might live that way, where it's like, okay, I believe in Judgment Day, but that has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now. Like right now, I just need to get to work by 8 a.m. I need to have my lunch. I need to call so-and-so. And it just becomes a very like disconnected life from the spiritual grounding that we're guided towards. So this idea of expend yourself in the consciousness of God is an important message, because it is not normal for people to do this, especially in our time. Like it takes an additional effort. We're not living somewhere that's highly spiritual. We're not living somewhere even that's highly religious, right? You can say a lot of people subscribe to a religion, but it's very different. Like there's other parts of the world where their actual speech has constant dua in it, and they're not even Muslim, but they're centered. They're very centered in their relationship with God. Colombia was like this. Almost any conversation I had with anyone in Colombia, and they're not Muslim, would end in a dua. Like they're people who have prayer in their life, in their speech, in their maybe it was a particular city I was visiting, but it was just so refreshing to see people who God was part of their daily speech and daily conversation in their daily life. So expending ourselves in God's consciousness, in God consciousness, and our capacity. Like we have a lot of energy, we could spend it in so many things. We could spend it in lots of hobbies, we could spend it in recreation. And it wasn't until my husband and I actually lived in Egypt that we realized how much of our time as American Muslims was spent in pure recreation. And I remember telling him, like, we were like invited to lunch and dinner like all the time. Like we were just, you know what I mean? Like we were just always eating at someone's house, in some restaurant, in some place, and let's try this new thing here. Did you know this new whatever? And then you go there and you're like, wow, this sister who's in like Al-Azhar is attending 3 universities at the same time. Al-Azhar is just one school she's attending. She's also doing a master's in, AUC, and she's also doing a master's at Cairo University. And you're like, where does she get the time to do that? Well, she doesn't do what we do, or even like really elderly people who we'd find out about, like someone who's like quite literally in their 70s, 80s, and they just got their PhD. And you're like, you're still in school. Like you did that at that age, may Allah bless the Egyptian people. We got schooled by the Egyptians in terms of how the discipline is, or the work ethic is, or the study ethic is, in terms of people who just don't waste their time. And I always say, like, the Egyptian scholar is the one who like really causes despair, not because he tells you to be sad, but because his living example is like, if I studied for the rest of my life, I wouldn't be able to do like half of what you're doing right now, because they literally had memorized every text. Have you met scholars who memorized every text they teach? They tell the students to read, and then they just listen to it and they correct. And it's like a big text. And that's like, no, that's not what it says. Go back, read it again. And that's like, how do they attain this level of scholarship? Well, they don't waste their time. They really don't waste their time in the same way that we're accustomed to it. I'm not saying this to make us to cause the same levels of despair that I just talked about, but just to say that we can do better. Like we can do a lot better. Sometimes the messaging that we get is, you're doing too much. If you're not hurting people, if you're not harming anyone else, right? In terms of what you're doing. If you're not, maybe it might be inconvenient, right? To spend more time in worship or spend more time in things that are going to be very rewarded acts. I just want to say that you're being given a green light from the Quran to go ahead and do this. Go ahead and expend yourself in God's way. And he says your efforts and your capacity. Now, I wanted to go back to where the previous verse ended with Wallahu indahu ajrun azim. He says, for the one who prefers the love of Allah and his obedience over the love of wealth and children. And he says, essentially, and the rat race. Like to love Allah more than you love the rat race. He doesn't, the word that it's used in Arabic is wasa'i ila masalihihim. Like to basically rush, sa'i, the same thing that you do from Safa and Marwa, to run like that to the things that are like in your best interests, like worldly interests. So the one who prefers the love of Allah to this kind of like rat race, and the love of wealth and children. And he says that this ayah is not to discourage spending time. I'm glad we got to this. It's not to discourage spending time with your spouses and children. The point is not to let them busy us from our purpose, from the remembrance of Allah and obedience to Him. And if it is easy to remember Allah and to practice your faith with them, then spending your time with them is actually awla. It is preferred. So the Prophet Muhammad, or this is related from Anas radiallahu anhu, from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he asked him, "O Messenger of Allah, is sitting with your family more beloved to you or sitting in the masjid?" And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Sitting for an hour with the family," and he's referring to his own family, "is more beloved to me than i'tikaf in my masjid here, Masjid al-Nabawi. And a dirham spent on the family is better than spent in the way of Allah." So again, in context, it doesn't mean that money spent to spoil people and to give and to do waste is better than money for the sake of God. But remembering the Prophet's family, and that remembering the Prophet's family, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, were themselves people who donated everything they had. Right, every single one of his wives were known for their generosity. That they would, if someone knocked on their door, they wouldn't refuse a single person, and that oftentimes whatever food was in the house would be given out before the Prophet would come home. And so like so spending on his family, right? Meaning because his family is worthy of that. They were not people who wasted money or wasted wealth. But the point is that if you do have a pious family, then your time with them is more rewarded, and when you're spending on them, if it's not israf, if it's not wasteful, is also better. Okay, now to 7. I know we're at Maghrib time. I'm just going to do the tafsir quickly then for these last 2 verses, inshallah, and then we'll conclude. If you lend unto God a goodly loan, He will multiply it for you and forgive you, and God is thankful and clement. Just one more thing about the previous verse. Forgive me for this. Here it says, listen, obey, and spend. It's in this order as it should be. And he says, listen to what you have been enjoined, obey to what you have been commanded, and then spend of that which you have been given of rizq in the ways that you have been encouraged to, purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you spend in this way, this is good for you. This is better for your soul than spending in other ways. There's also this idea that listening and obeying indicate 2 necessary dispositions towards revelation. I'm here to listen to it and then to do this. So I'm coming with an open heart of acceptance even before I've read what I'm going to read. But in order for us to act properly in accordance with revelation, we're supposed to contemplate it and understand it. So the missing word here is contemplate. Listen, contemplate, and obey. We can't act upon something if we don't understand it. And we will often act upon things incorrectly if we don't understand it. So in this sense, learning and embarking on a process of learning your faith is part of the way that we listen to the Quran. It's not just I'm going to read it myself and then interpret it myself. We do have to look at tafsir, we do have to look at fiqh, what the scholars derived in terms of law. And then that's how, when we take that understanding, then we can apply it correctly. Otherwise, we can be led to extremes if we try to interpret for ourselves. And that has happened a lot in our history. So to spend means to spend in charity. It can also mean to give in zakah. It can also mean to spend on yourself in such a way that is for the purpose of your, like there are ways on spending on yourself that's going to be rewarded by God. Does anyone know? Yes. Trying to earn an income. Yes, but like spending on yourself, not earning for yourself, but spending on yourself. Now you're like paying for something. And yes, I mean, for the purpose of progressing in your faith, people have to spend money. That's just something that happens. Sometimes you might have to pay for an airplane flight. Yeah, or Umrah or Hajj. These are ways in which spending for ourselves is actually counts for us, not against us. You might see something and you're like, oh, that sounds so expensive. But it's like, would you buy a dress or two for that cost? How many coffees could you skip for that cost? But this is going to be for your soul, so it counts for you. It doesn't count like you spend it in the same way as when you buy from this dunya for its own sake. And yes, going to Hajj and Umrah, absolutely. So there's like ways of spending that's good for your soul, and we should do those kinds of spending, or we should be encouraged to do those kinds of spending. And he says, in the fourth meaning, spend on what is better for your souls. All of these are mentioned in the tafsir of Imam al-Qurtubi. So it would mean that those who spend on what is best will not experience, this is the key point. The surah's name is Taghabun, right? Mutual dispossession. This is when there's like people taking from each other from things that, in terms of rights that were taken or wrongs that were incurred. If you are spending for your soul, then you, inshallah, will not be from the people who have that sense of dispossession on the day of judgment. Other people might feel that about you, because this is going to raise your rank. If it raises your rank, then others may be like, oh, I wish I would have, why did I spend my money that way? If I would have spent my money like them, I would have been like them. So it says this is a protection from experiencing the dispossession on the day of judgment. In verse 17, the next verse talks about lending to Allah a goodly loan. So in this context, whoever is shielded, again, from the avarice of their own soul, indicates both a general principle that like our souls have agreed to it. So if you're shielded from this greed, that's one meaning. But also in this context, the one who does not succumb to the trials associated with family and property, right? But they're able to deal with these tests of wealth and family and property in a just and equitable manner. It is they who shall prosper. And Imam Ibn Ajibah, he says, Al-Muflihun, these are the people who win every khair. Al-Faizun bi kulli khair. Like they got everything. They won the jackpot. You overcame all of these things. At the end, inshallah, you are from the truly successful. If you lend unto God a goodly loan, he will multiply it for you and forgive you, and God is thankful and clement. And in contrast to the disbelievers who have purchased error at the price of guidance and punishment at the price of forgiveness, the believers will sell their souls seeking God's good pleasure, meaning like my nafs is for God, right? I'm going to expend it in what God wants. Other people sell their soul to the world, to the devil, to other things, but the believer's like, no, I'm going to sell it to my Lord. This is the goodly loan. And Allah mentions with Al-Baqarah, the parable of those who spend their wealth in the way of God is that of a grain that grows 7 ears, and every ear 100 grains, and God multiplies for whomsoever he will. So just that image I've always loved, but this idea that the bukhl, the stinginess of our souls would make us feel like, I don't want to spend on this. That's too much. That's too generous. Or that's like, we look at things like that. And then if you were to just compare, okay, look at how my hesitance on this situation. And then if I were to buy something from this world, would I have that hesitance? A clear place where this plays out for us in community life is if you're at a fundraising dinner, a donation dinner, right? There'll often be like an auction, right? So if I'm getting something, the idea of donating something or like buying something that's an auction, I'm gonna hold something afterwards that's in this life. That person who gave their last check of donation, they thought they were done. And then someone holds up like a beautiful like art mural or whatever, and they're like, maybe it was only worth $50, and they give like $500 for it. What it actually means is they had $450, or they had 500 extra dollars that they could have just given, but they wanted to hold something afterwards, right? In this life. So there is this tendency within ourselves that there's a limit that we think is our limit when it comes to spending in the way of God. But when it comes to spending and I have a worldly transaction, the person finds himself much more generous or much more able to spend, right? And may Allah help us with that. Imam Ghazali, he says that if you don't have a quality, then pretend to have it. And not like pretend to other people, but like this idea of, okay, so you're not generous, then donate. Over time, generosity will become part of your nature. And if you feel like it's hard to donate, like they say, give until it hurts, right? So initially, maybe a small donation hurts. By the way, non-Muslims think a $10 a month donation to like a huge cause is a big deal. Like, I think that's very strange. Like, and when I say non-Muslim, I'm talking about like wealthy non-Muslims. When they give like a $10 donation, they think that's a really big deal. If you're a student and you don't have a job and you're in a student, $10 is a lot, right? Like if you are barely making ends meet, $10 is a lot. It's a huge donation. But if you are a multimillionaire and you're giving $10 a month to a cause and you feel like you've done your job, I just think that like subhanAllah, some of these things are so strange. Like I know Muslims who work for nonprofit organizations that are not related to the Muslim community. And so some of the things that they will relay, I'm just like, subhanAllah, like that's not how our community is at all. We're not even, alhamdulillah, we're not like that when it comes to the causes that we love and believe in. And I think we will close, inshallah, knower of the unseen and the seen, mighty and wise. Those are beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we don't have time to talk about one by one. They would each take an hour. And so with that, we will close. Oh, and the homework actually for this week was with your families. So this would be either with your spouse, if you're married, or your kids, if you have kids. And if you don't, then with a member of your family. And if you are a student and you live with others and you don't have physical family around you, then maybe with someone who is, if you're living with a roommate, the idea of your inner circle, whoever is like your family right now, try to be like, we want to be people who make remembrance and worship easy on our family. So the idea is we want, like the Prophet Muhammad said, an hour with my own family is more beloved to me than an hour in my masjid here. Why? Because the Prophet's family is the Prophet's family. Like they're the most noble human beings on earth, right? So he's going to be in basically beautiful company when he's with his own family, which is extremely good for our souls. Like very, very good for our souls to be in good company. Good company just requires a good intention and hopefully like, acts that are pleasing to God. So intend this week to do something with your family that has this good intention and to do something that's pleasing to God. Like maybe something, if you're already doing it, maybe spruce it up a little bit more. And if you're not doing it at all, maybe think of something that you and your family can do together. That's like, where it builds that spiritual suhbah environment for your own family. And if you don't have your family local to you, if you have roommates, if you do not have roommates and you're by yourself, you're gonna have to find a good sister or a good brother to partner with on this assignment that would be interested in doing that with you, inshallah. Any questions? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم آمين يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. O God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us amongst your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us the success to act upon what you have taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven, not one of us wretched or deprived. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen.